Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. I am your host, Brian Fisher. The program is Focal Point. The network is AFR Talk, the American Family Radio Talk Network. Honored to welcome to our decision maker line a frequent guest right here on Focal Point, Elaine Donnelly with the Center for Military Readiness. Elaine, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Hi, Brian. It's good to talk with you again.
Well, it's great to have you back on. And, of course, there's a lot of buzz right now in D.C. over the nomination of Chuck Hagel to be the next Secretary of Defense. You have done some analysis of this. You've done some writing on this. Give us, before we dive into some of the deeper issues that are involved here, give us your quick take on Chuck Hagel as the next Secretary of Defense.
Well, there's certainly many reasons to ask Mr. Hagel a lot of questions about foreign policy, about his position on Israel, Iraq, Iran, all of those issues. And there's already been a lot of discussion, a lot of controversy about it. But the silliest thing about this nomination is this flap coming from the LGBT, the gay activist groups. They are in a bit of a fit, shall we say. They're upset with Senator Hagel because he said something actually reflecting what many other senators said at the time, that a man named James Harmel was being nominated by Bill Clinton to be the ambassador to Luxembourg. Actually, there were a couple of other countries he was going to go to as well, but it just didn't fit. Shall we say, there were local laws that kind of made it controversial. But here it was, the nomination was there. A lot of senators were willing to go along with the nomination, including Chuck Hagel, which is something a lot of people may not realize. But then came all the news about the activism of James Harmel. He gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to gay activist causes to promote homosexuality as a lifestyle. I've listed a number of these funds that he gave to many groups in an article that is posted on our website, www.cmrlink.org. $600,000, for instance, to the ACLU. He is a co-founder of the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest gay activist group to this day. He gave a huge amount of money to the San Francisco Library to set up a section of that library to promote lesbian and gay causes in his name. It's named after him. And there was a lot of controversy at the time about children being exposed to very inappropriate materials. So when Chuck Hagel reflected that controversy in a statement that he made 14 years ago, there was no reason to apologize for it. In fact, I think people should be more concerned about this apology, which was unnecessary, because he's kind of equating LGBT rights and civil rights as pretty much the same thing.
Well, and that's the concern I've got, Elaine, is that he's repudiated those statements. I think he was right then, and as you've illustrated why he was right to take that position in opposition to Harmel's nomination. And now it seems like he's completely capitulated on that. And it seems to me as conservatives, we ought to be concerned about the values on the issue of homosexuality that are going to come into that office with the next Secretary of Defense, because we've got a raft of issues that deal with homosexuality that the military is in the middle of dealing with. And in my judgment, that alone, from my vantage point, disqualifies him to be the next Secretary of Defense, because he's already compromised on an issue that I think you and I both would agree is having a detrimental effect on the military.
Right, and you're hitting, of course, on the serious issue that is behind the silly issue. What this is all about is intimidation. You have these gay activist groups, and you can just see their minds working. They're going to intimidate. They are trying to intimidate this man. They already got him to issue an apology that was unnecessary. It's all so that if and when he gets confirmed, they'll march in and say, okay, we want you, Mr. Secretary of Defense, to implement the full range of LGBT law, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender law. In fact, the group called Get Equal, one of those, the Log Cabin Republicans, the other group that is leading this fight against Hagel from the left, they're saying that, well, we need a Secretary of Defense that will implement transgender rights in the military. Really? Well, what does that mean? I think the members of the Senate should ask the nominee, Mr. Hagel, do you think there should be transgenders in the military? What is the what would be the consequence of that? How far are you going to take this, Mr. Secretary? These are legitimate questions because social issues do affect the men and women in our military. And this part of it really is no joke. But we are seeing a political game playing out here, and the LGBT groups should not be taken seriously. What the Congress should take seriously, the Senate, is the consequence of LGBT law, what they voted for, what the previous Congress voted for, when they repealed the law known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Elaine, let me play a soundbite. This is Jay Carney, who was being asked yesterday about Hagel's position on Israel in particular. Mm-hmm. But I want you to listen to Jay Carney's response, because what he will say is that Hagel is in sync with the president's policies, and that's broader, I think, than just on Israel. It also has to do with the homosexual agenda. And before we play the clip, Elaine, maybe you can comment on the signing statement that President Obama issued in conjunction with signing the Defense Appropriations Bill, where he came out very strongly, in my judgment, against conscience rights for for chaplains when it comes to the issue of same-sex marriage.
Yes.
So tell us about what the president...
Sorry, I thought you were going to play a soundbite.
Yeah, let me have you tell us what President Obama did, and then we'll play the soundbite.
Right, okay, yes. The signing statement, indeed, did question the conscience clause, and it's a modest one, to protect the constitutional rights of chaplains in the military. There could have been broader language that covered military personnel in general. There is a reference to accommodation of religious liberty for personnel in general, but it was modified somewhat, and it's not as strong as the original law was when it passed on the House side. But here we have a president saying this language is ill-advised. He is saying, as Mr. Hormel's apology said, that, they seem to think that civil rights and LGBT demands are all the same thing. That is a mindset that, yes, the senator seems to share at this time.
And that
even though he objected to what came out about James Hormel 14 years ago.
And that seems to me, Elaine, to be a huge concern for us, because the next Secretary of Defense is going to be responsible to implement whatever changes are made with regard to the homosexual agenda. And if you've got a guy where the president's spokesman is saying, look, he's in sync with the president and all this, that's a scary thought. Well, let's listen.
I think he probably is, and he is on Israel as well.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about Israel next. Let's listen to Jay Carney responding to a question about Chuck Hagel as the next Secretary of Defense.
But does the president feel like it's important that Hagel clarify some of the statements that he made? Even after the president's announcement today, we saw statements from various lawmakers asking him to clarify what he meant.
I think that the process will allow for what it always does, which is a review by the Senate of presidential nominees. I think that Senator Hagel's record on those issues and so many others demonstrate that he is in sync with the president's policies. And on the first issue, let's be clear. President Obama has, in his administration, overseen the closest, most substantial support for Israel's defense of any administration in history. And that is a judgment that is not just made by me or others in the president's administration. It's a judgment that has been made and expressed by Prime Minister Netanyahu and by Defense Minister Ehud Barak. And that is a policy that will continue under President Obama with all the members of his national security team.
So you have Jay Carney out there, Elaine, saying, look, he's in sync with Israel. He supports Israel. This has been the most supportive administration of Israel in history. And I'm looking at a headline from CBS News, and this headline to me says it all. Hagel nomination cheers Iran, worries Israel. Your comments.
Well, what you're seeing there is a focus only on some support for Israel. That is a half-truth. The other half of the truth is that the president has also shown support for other factions in that part of the world who are very hostile to Israel. And there's the worry. Certainly the members of the Senate need to find out from Mr. Hagel what is his position now, and what is he willing to do to make sure that the enemies of Israel don't try to overrun and destroy that country as they have said they want to do. What will happen in the future? Again, the emphasis needs to be on the future. you cannot point only to the past and say, well, everything's okay now. What about the future conflicts, and what are you going to do to prepare for them, Mr. Secretary? Our military is very much under strain right now. Budget cuts are looming. There are demands to have women in the infantry as well as gays in the military. We've got unresolved issues involving same-sex marriage or marriage-like ceremonies in the armed forces. What about the education programs in Department of Defense schools? If you have a library comparable to what Mr. Hormel established out there in San Francisco, is that what we want to do? Should we have gay pride celebrations? This is a legitimate question that needs to be asked of Mr. Hagel, but we all have to keep in mind, he is the president's man. So the president has had LGBT equality celebrations at the White House 4 years in a row in the month of June. No doubt that will continue because elections have consequences, and the president was reelected. So Hagel is the president's man, but he is by no means. I would not refer to him as a Republican unless you add the adjective contrarian Republican. I think the president is seeking some political cover for what he wants to do in the way of budget cuts and also loading on all these social issues on the military. Mr. Hagel is the perfect guy for that purpose.
And I'm looking, Elaine Donnelly is my guest, president of the Center for Military Readiness, CMR Link. Is it .org, Elaine?
CMRlink.org. And you'll see an article there. I've posted an article about Mr. Hormel, and it links to an article in the San Francisco Examiner magazine from, I think it's 1996. And you'll see there an awful lot of information about Mr. Hormel, even before the nomination became as controversial as it was. Believe me, there's good reason to oppose this Hagel nomination, but the gay rights complaints about him, that's not a good reason to complain about Hagel.
In fact, the reason for complaint may be that he's switched sides on that issue and could be very problematical for the values that we care about.
Expediency to try to apologize to that faction in a way that wasn't necessary. It shows less than a strong principle behind what he might do in the future.
Our guest has been Elaine Donnelly, president of the Center for Military Readiness, CMRlink.org. More information there about why the nomination of Chuck Hagel to be the next Secretary of Defense is very problematical for conservative social as well as military conservatives. Elaine, thank you very much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Focal Point AFR Talk back in 2.